Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Carrie Massley, and welcome to our next edition of the Society of Mississippi Archivists Virtual Table Talk. Today, we are featuring speakers DeeDee Baldwin, Karen Burch, and Bianca Ford as they give their talk against all odds, telling the stories of the first Black legislators in Mississippi. Before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. You probably heard us talking before we officially got started about the chat box versus the Q&A box. If you have something that you would like to say or a question you would like to ask and you want everyone here at the table talk to be able to see that, please type it in the Q&A box because unfortunately the chat box does not display to everyone. It doesn't allow participants to see what other participants have written. But Q&A, the Q&A box allows everyone to see what's going on. So please type your questions, concerns, comments into that Q&A box. And we'll address any of your questions at the end of the meeting. We'll reserve about 10 to 15 minutes to address any of those questions at that time. So thank you again for joining us. And I'm not going to waste too much time with the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to DeeDee at this time.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks to both Karen and Bianca for being here. I first emailed them about doing this in November, so I've been looking forward to it and I've been excited about it for a really long time, and I'm so grateful that they both were up for this, for giving us this hour. And we are going to leave a good bit of time for y'all to ask questions because both of their stories are so interesting. I know that y'all will probably have questions for them. So we will go ahead and jump in. I am going to start with just a few slides that kind of show the website that started this. And I'm only going to talk for a few minutes because Karen and Bianca are the ones that y'all want to hear, and they're the ones I want to hear. So yeah, I'm just going to introduce you really quick to what this website is for those who don't know yet. Against all odds, and there's the URL for it. It's muchado.net/legislators. It's a website documenting the first Black legislators in Mississippi from 1870, which is when the first ones were elected, to 1894, which is when the last two held office. And it provides biographical information, photographs, newspaper clippings, quotes from primary and secondary sources. It's basically just designed to help people find information about these men and to jumpstart their research into anybody they might be researching. So the site is basically laid out as a list of names, and you can click on the name and it takes you to that person's page. And you can see here the first person up is George Washington Albright. He comes up first in alphabetical order, and this is actually Karen's ancestor that she'll be telling us more about. So you can see kind of how the pages are laid out. And while we're here, I wanted to share some cool news about George Washington Albright. I've been working with one of my colleagues in the cataloging department. Her name is Lauren Geiger, and I think she's here. Hi, Lauren. She's been working on creating Library of Congress authority headings for a lot of these men. And for those who aren't in the library world, authority records are basically used as subject headings in library catalogs. And so she's been creating records to submit to the Library of Congress to make these official subject headings. And as of today, we have one for George Washington Albright.
Oh, wow.
And the link is on the site now. And I was trying to figure out where the little Q&A box is. Oh, here it is. I'll see it. I'm going to paste that link into the box for anyone who might want to click and go look at that one. And it's not letting me send it for some reason. But the link is on the site. If you go to the site, you'll see a link to the Library of Congress subject headings. And so I thought Karen would be excited to know that George Washington Albright is now a subject heading in the Library of Congress. So thank you, Lauren, for doing that. Also on the profile pages, most of them have newspaper clippings, whatever ones I was able to find, so you can see wherever they're mentioned. And then if you click on the clipping, it has like the original article, and then I also transcribed each one. and they're linked to the names of anybody who's mentioned in that article so people can go back and forth and don't get lost. The site also has a version on the Mississippi State University Library's website as a digital exhibit. So there's two different versions of it. They both have the same content, it's just in two different locations. So I just wanted to make people aware of that as well. So Karen, if you're ready, I'm going to go over to your first slide, and I'm going to start calling Karen Kiwi because that is her preferred nickname. So if you're wondering who Kiwi is, that's Karen.
That's me.
Take it away, Karen.
Thank you, DeeDee. I mean, you took my breath away with that announcement. That is, you know, I was just sitting here thinking how far he has come, really, in this great saga, and to think of all of the men, well, all of the men and women, because there were a few women, who worked so hard to actualize the promise of America. It's breathtaking. So what I have here are several slides that I have been blessed to inherit. They've come down through my mother, my grandmother, and other family members. So we can go to the first one, DeeDee. Now, this is obviously a picture that you just saw of my great-grandfather, George Washington Albright. He was born in 1846 in Mississippi. I have always assumed that he was born on the Albright plantation, but that's an assumption. So if anybody knows, you can let me know. His parents were lived on two different plantations. So he grew up with his mother, who was a cook in, so to speak, the big house. And as such, she was privy to a lot of things that went on in the house, including when the children were learning to read and write and studying. She was paying attention to that. And it was through her devices that George was able to learn to read and write. Now, on the site, on DeeDee's site, Against All Odds, I have sent her an interview that George did with the Daily Worker in about 1930, early 30s. And he goes into all manner of stuff, but one of the things was to say that the punishment for a slave learning to read and write was having a finger or a thumb cut off at the top joint and 500 lashes. And the owner then would be charged some nominal fee, but it obviously was the slave that would bear the burden or the brunt of that punishment. But luckily, he was never caught. And he used his this skill, reading and writing, which all of us know opens up the world to you, to work with other slaves. Now, during the, I think this was either shortly before or during the Civil War, there was something called Lincoln's Legal Loyal League. And in part, it was abolitionists and others who were working for the abolition of slavery. George became involved in it as a young person. He was a teenager then, and was a runner with information that either, through Lincoln himself or the troop movements, any kind of information they wanted to get to the various plantations. George was one of the people who would do these stealthy runs in the dead of night, using what we've all come to know as the quilts with the signals, or the rock formations that sent a message. So he was very involved in the freedom of his people since he was small. Now, his father was sold away to a plantation in Texas when George was 11. I'm going to skip ahead a few years. The Emancipation Proclamation happens. We're in Reconstruction now. And during Reconstruction, the US government formed the Freedmen's Aid Bureau. And part of that was to invite white school teachers from the North to come down and work with the freed slaves, or the freed people in the South. And we can go to the next slide, DeeDee. This is a picture of my great-grandmother, Josephine Hardy, who came down with a group of others to teach. And George was very involved in, and this would be after emancipation, was very involved in setting up schools, and and as he says, they were for all children, poor white children, Black children, because he knew the power of education. So I don't know the ins and outs. I wasn't there, but George had an older daughter, a daughter through, I'm going to call it his first marriage, to Maria Hale. I knew of Eliza's existence, but it wasn't until DeeDee's site that I had a name for her. So it was very eye-opening. But this was at the time that George and Josephine met. And how their relationship developed, I don't know. I'm just going to say I'm glad it did. I think we can go on to the next one. This has no title, but I'm sorry about that. But this is a picture in later years of the Albright clan, so to speak. I should fill in that George was in the Mississippi State Senate from, I think it's 1874 to 1877. And I think what happened was another thing that DeeDee opened my eyes to, which was the Clinton riot, or the Clinton massacre. A lot of these men were outright killed. In this interview, George talks about many of his friends who they would find in the woods, dead or lynched, burned. It was quite traumatic. On top of that, we have this interracial relationship. So their time was numbered. Their days were numbered. And at some point, they left. And I think what they did was first go to Chicago, where their first child was born, and that was Joseph Leroy Albright. And then shortly thereafter, they moved to Emporia, Kansas. So on this picture that you're looking at, again, this is several years after. In the middle is an older picture of George Washington. Next to him is my great-grandmother, Josephine Albright. I'm going to go right to left in the back. The first woman is my grandmother, Crystal Albright. Next to her is their first son, Roy. In between, in the middle, in the back, is Eliza, George's first daughter. And next to her is Wendell Albright, who was the baby. So Josephine and George had 3 children, but Eliza was really the fourth, or the first, because she was the oldest. In the front are 3 of those children are Roy's sons, and 2 of them, the little girl in the very front, in the very middle, and the young boy, the tallest boy, were Eliza's children, Grace Dunlap and Lincoln Dunlap. The woman on the far left was Roy's wife. So this is basically my family, and I'm going to kind of cut this short because there are a lot of slides, but let's go on to the next. From Emporia, they moved in 1892 to Los Angeles, California. And Albright met a man who talked to him about homesteading and said he had a plot of land that was about 4 miles outside of downtown Los Angeles, and would he like to go see it? So Mr. Reynolds took Mr. Albright to go look at this plot of land, and he fell in love. And it was a beautiful piece of land with wild pear orchards. My grandmother has described it as you could see the geese flying in formation to come land on the stream that ran through this property. And it's hard to imagine Los Angeles, California as being anything rural or agriculturally based, but it was a beautiful place. So he sent for the family, who came at Christmas Eve. They arrived in 1892. This is a picture of, again, my grandmother, Crystal. We can go to the next one, DeeDee. This is also a picture of my grandmother, Crystal. She and Albright, in addition to what became 5 lots of land where they originally settled, each homesteaded a separate property. And it was about 70 miles north of Los Angeles in Antelope Valley. So Crystal would go up for 6 months of the year and work her land. Albright would go the next 6 months and work his property. So somebody was always there with Josephine, my great-grandmother. But this is Crystal at work, and I just love this picture. Okay, we can go to the next one. This is a picture of Roy, the oldest of the 3 and I don't know what Roy did professionally or, in his work life, but he evidently could sing like an angel and was a choir director at a large Black church in Los Angeles. He died very young, I think in the early 30s. But this is Roy, and we can go to the next one. This is also Roy in the middle, and this is an LA Athletics club. And we're always surprised to see that it's integrated because, as I was saying to DeeDee the other day, LA was just like most places in America where segregation was rampant. But here they are in their athletic regalia, so to speak. We can go to the next one. This is a wonderful picture of George and Josephine in front of their first house, a house that he built in Los Angeles on the property. I keep meaning to ask my sister because we grew up on that particular lot, but I don't remember the house that we were first in looking like that. But in any event, this was their home, and I'm going to suspect this is maybe 1910. Okay, we can go to the next one. This is still an older picture of George at I'm guessing in his 60s. But yeah, it's so interesting to watch the aging process, and what a gift to be able to see these people in their aging process. Okay, we can go to the next one. This is Josephine. I think she aged. I think life was not easy for either of them, and both in Emporia and Los Angeles, they worked the land. We believe that she had several miscarriages in between Roy and Crystal, because there's a 10-year gap there before Crystal and Wendell were born. But she still stayed active in education. In fact, she and George were instrumental in starting the elementary school that is literally across the street from where this house that she's standing in front of is. So they, well, she was well loved in the neighborhood. Let me put it that way. We can go on. This is Crystal pregnant with one of her 3 children, and I don't know which one, but we can go on to the next. These are just interesting pictures to see as we come up through the years. This is my grandmother and grandfather, Crystal and Rufus Marshal. Yeah. Okay, we can go to the next. This is the family still expanding, and my 2 aunts are standing and seated from, again, right to left. On the swing is Crystal, my grandmother, Eliza, she and Crystal stayed in touch, which is a lovely thing. My godmother, Melanie Blocker, and then at the end is my mom holding me. At her feet are my late brother, Clinton. Next to him is my dear big sister, Cheryl. one of Mrs. Blocker's sons. And then at the end is, again, my late dear cousin, Marcus Lewis. We can go on. So this is, again, the family, but the men are now involved, where on the far right is Wendell, my father, Bernard. Next is Rufus in the back. Next to the woman is the wife of my uncle Rufus, and his wife Inez, and then the kids are in the front. So we can go on. This is my grandmother Crystal, who we called Nana. All right, next one. This is my mother. So this would be Crystal and Rufus's oldest daughter, oldest child, Josephine, who was named after her grandmother, and my father, Bernard Napoleon Burch. So we like to joke, we did like to joke with them about Napoleon and Josephine, and their lovely, lovely love story. We can go on. This is me and my mom. So I'm 68 now. This has to be 66 years ago. And next. This was at their Nana and Granddaddy's 50th wedding anniversary. And these are a lot of those kids now grown up. And we can go on. I probably should have said, if we could jump back to the previous picture, the little boy in the front on the right is Eric Lewis, who was not born when those first family pictures were taken. And then the little boy also in the front, standing in front of me. Oh boy, I'm blanking. He was a great-grand. He was one of the first great-grandchildren. So, and then there are husbands and, yeah, my cousin Crystal and Robin Lewis. So now we can go on. This is my lineage. It's people that you've met in previous pictures. From right to left is my beloved late brother Clinton, my mom Josephine, my father Bernard, me, my sister Cheryl, and she is pregnant with her first child, Melissa. So, yeah, I think that's this last picture. I think, yeah, this is just a picture of my mom, and I put it in there because we, the legacy that we've been given. Number one is education. Very strong in the family. My mother was an educator for many years. I was an educator. My niece, my sister, it's very strong in the family. Also, good cooking comes down from the family. And one other thing that I didn't realize until I read all of the things on DeeDee's site was Albright was called the Kansas Cyclone because he could stir an audience to, he was a motivational speaker and evidently a brilliant orator. And in high school, I was part of a group where we did speech and debate. And I really loved it. And I didn't realize where, it was just something I did. But when I read that, I said, that's where that's from. So it's wonderful to see these echoes from the past. So I'm going to stop because I think I've gone on a long time. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiwi.
Sure.
I am going to stop sharing my PowerPoint and I'm going to switch the sharing thing over to Bianca. So take it away, Bianca.
Hi, thank you, DeeDee. So I would like to thank you for inviting me and Kiwi to share our stories. I initially met DeeDee through doing research through some images and photographs that I had received from some cousins and my father. So by trade, I do digital marketing, and I felt like it was very important that we preserve these files and images and things that we have so that future generations and long lost family members and people that may be doing research have access to a lot of the images and photographs and family documents that we have. So with that said, I would like to share a presentation with a few images that we have that I received from my dad and regarding our ancestor who is Emmanuel Handy. So let me go ahead and share. One moment. Sorry, just give me a second here. All right, so can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Emmanuel Handy. This is a picture that the family received from our cousin Dewey. He was part of the 82nd Regiment in the Civil War. He was born around 1834. And he also, like Kiwi, was noted to be a great orator. And I'll kind of go through the slides to not take up too much time. His son was Emmanuel Handy as well. He was Emmanuel Handy Jr. And he married a woman named Florence Geneva. Florence Geneva was the child of a slave master who was a judge, and they together were gifted, I guess, or more like reparations, a large plot of land. So these two together had 11 children, who I'll take to the next slide. Depicted, you see 9 of their children, 2 of which are girls, the lineage that my father and myself come from, but they're not depicted here. So from what I hear and what I've talked to family members, they said that they were at college. So that's why they weren't depicted in this picture. Moving on to the next. This is my grandfather, my father's father, great grandchild of Emmanuel Handy. And then his mother here is Cora, who was at college when that picture was taken. So we have Cora, we have the grandfather. And then moving right along, we have my father and Emmanuel Handy, who everyone says look very similar, which is quite interesting because the time between the pictures was about a century. So 100 years between the 2 pictures taken. So I find that quite fascinating. Florence Geneva's father was Judge Ephraim Payton, who was a slave owner. We're not entirely sure if the land that they got was from the father or from his son, which would be her brother. So in speaking to my cousin, she said, I think they were about 90 acres that they got, which she now has called Handy Heights. And so that land started at 90 acres, and I think now it's about 180 acres, is from what she updated me on. And then here are some interesting pictures of Handy Heights. She also has an Instagram page that everyone can follow called Handy Heights, and there's more images of the family, the land, and more scenic pictures of that. And then this is my cousin. So I went to go visit her, and then we kind of caught up on all this stuff. So just to do a diagram of our family lineage, starting at the very top, our oldest living family member is a woman named Moaning Payton. And that is from 1800s. She had Isabella King Terry. They had Florence, who married Emmanuel Handy. And then they had the 11 children, down to my grandfather, and then to my father, and to myself. And then here is the picture of Moaning. And this is supposedly the oldest picture that, or as far back as we can go. And yeah, that is pretty much the synopsis of our. There's a lot of stories that come from our lineage. Speaking with other family members, we have a lot of education, a lot of music. There were some stories that came from his wife, supposedly was a baker who made really fancy cakes. So in doing a lot of this research, it was, quite interesting to find out all these stories.
Bianca, that last picture is amazing.
We're not entirely sure, but that's, where it's either a family member or it may be Moaning. So we can't be quite sure because the picture is so old, but yeah, it's amazing to have a picture from 1800s.
And what a name.
Yeah.
It reminds me of those Puritan names from like the 1600s and stuff. Moaning. Well, we can open it up now to people's Q&A. And I see one from Susie Ling, who I think you know, Kiwi.
I do.
Yes. Susie wrote a really wonderful article about Kiwi's grandmother and mother helping their neighbors, their Japanese neighbors, during the time of the internment camps. There's a link to it on the website if people are interested. It's a really cool article. So Susie asks, isn't it unusual for such knowledge of African American lineage? Amazing, amazing. So I guess it's more of a comment, but she sent that while Bianca was talking. If anybody else has questions.
I should say, if I could take a minute, that I started working with Susie when I was trying to formulate this book project that I'm working on. We got together last year, and I think it was early March. The article that Susie did was actually about my Aunt Barbara, who was a young woman during World War II, and the neighborhood that we all grew up in was about 90% Japanese. So during World War II, when they were all put in internment camps, it was a tragic event. But Susie, this article that she wrote was wonderful. And when I was with her, she's also a history professor. She got on her computer and was typing away. Next thing I know, she turns it around to me and says, "Is this him?" And she had a picture of George Washington, Albright, and it was on your site, DeeDee. So she immediately sent an email to you, and that's the power of history professors and people who know what they're doing in terms of research. But that's how I got connected with you. So thank you, Susie.
That was a very exciting day for me as well. That email was thrilling to get. Do y'all, Bianca and Kiwi, do y'all remember when you first heard that you had an ancestor who was in the Mississippi legislature? Do you remember who told you or what you thought?
Well, I know my dad tells me everything. He's a very good keeper of records, and he's always very adamant about making sure that I keep the records and I know about this. And he was telling me about his cousin who has a great wealth of knowledge regarding the family history and gave him a lot of family tree information and images, and he made photocopies and made sure to give to me and other family members. And so, yeah, I just remember being very excited and interested to learn about all that, and especially connecting the dots, because a lot of my other family members that have stories, a lot of these stories that I have personally that I didn't really get into in the presentation here are from DeeDee's work, archiving the news clippings and then using that as a thread to do more research. There are a lot of newspaper clippings that kind of connect the dots. For instance, Emmanuel Handy and his wife, their children they had some tragedy with their children. Like one of the women had a jealous lover who killed her, and then the son ended up getting into a bar fight, and and all these things are actually documented in newspaper clippings, and some of his speeches, some of the lines he would say, so you get a really good idea of what type of person he was. He seemed like he was a very spicy man. So a lot of those news clippings that you can see on Dee's website that she's created, it's just very interesting when you go and you read all the information on it. So I was very glad to kind of take that on and research and photocopy everything and put it in books. And hopefully that, another thing we did was we created my cousin is going to do like a museum. And so I got a piece of art commissioned of Emmanuel Handy, and I sent that to her. So I want to start commissioning some more art. So that way, not only do we have things that are documented through newspaper clippings and all the hard work that DeeDee's doing, we have, art and just a wealth of artifacts that we can keep, since all that stuff was lost in history. So.
And I don't know when I first learned of Albright, but it would have been through my grandmother, Crystal. Nana was the keeper of the story and the legacy. She had been very close to her parents, and so I'm sure she talked about it at all kinds of points as we were growing up. Now, my family lived across the street from my grandparents. In 1974, I was finishing up my undergraduate work at UCLA, and I saw a class that caught my eye. It was the oral history of Los Angeles. And I said, boy, that's me, that's us. So through this class, I did an extensive interview of my grandmother, and it became the bedrock of what I know. As I put this book together, it's just been an invaluable resource. So I think that's when, I don't know when I first heard about him. He and they have always been there. They're kind of like a North Star for the family. Yeah, so to answer your question.
There's a question in the chat from Deirdre Payne. Hi, Deirdre. She said, are there records of how these legislators voted during their tenure? They're in the annual Mississippi House and Senate journals, which our library here at Mississippi State has. I'm sure the Department of Archives and History has, and probably other university libraries in the state probably have those. Some of those are also on Google Books. Not all of them have been scanned, but a lot of them are on Google Books. And also sometimes the newspapers reported on how they voted. especially when it was white newspapers who were mad about how they voted.
Mm.
So yeah, there are records of how they voted. Let's see. I'll make sure we didn't miss anything. So I think it's really cool. Bianca, your family is planning a museum. Is that going to be in Copiah County? Sorry, you're on mute, Bianca.
That's going to be on Handy Heights. So she's still putting it together, but it's going to be basically a place that we can share with other Black families that maybe don't have all the history and the records that that we were fortunate enough to have. So I know that's the vision as of now. So they're just kind of cleaning up the property and building on it and working it out to where it'll be someplace that we all can go and learn, read, share. It's going to be a very creative place, educational space. So that's kind of what the plan is now. So
that is so cool that y'all are doing that, and Kiwi's working on a book. So like y'all are really, you and your families are really working on telling their stories, and so many of these men, not in the cases of Emmanuel Handy and George Washington Albright, fortunately, but so many of these men I haven't been able to find anything about. I can't find them on the census. I can't find a newspaper clipping that mentions them. So it's really fortunate and cool that y'all have this stuff. Are you aware of any libraries or archives that have stuff related to your ancestors, like maybe a place that has a letter one of them wrote or anything like that?
I'm not aware of, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I have gone through periods throughout my adult life of digging into the story, and then life takes over and work happens. So I haven't done as much research as I would like, but none to my knowledge.
yes, we have some information that's in books. When I was going down the rabbit hole on all the children and grandchildren and cousins and all that, I found some records of one of the reverends, I believe has a poem or a prayer in a book. And I kind of have to find that's in a box somewhere. And then I have records of, we had some female musicians. So those were the grandmothers and great aunts of my cousin who's doing the Handy Heights land. So they were very talented musicians, violinists, traveled all around the world. So there's some records of them in some books. Yeah.
We have a question in chat from my mom. She says, how do you preserve these wonderful photos? Where do y'all keep your photos? Or whoever has the originals in your family, where are they keeping them?
Well, I have photocopies. I think the originals are different houses or lost, but I know a lot of these are photocopies or photocopies of the images. So I kind of keep everything nicely and neatly in a book. And I try to keep everything on digital because I know that that's how a lot of images get lost. So I have a huge digital Drobo that has all my files, all my digital files, all the news clippings, pretty much everything that I've ever come across. I have in a big Drobo hard drive.
And I have to thank my mother. When she retired, sometime in the 90s, she got bit by the genealogical search bug, and first I think discovered Eric Foner and his great book Freedom's Lawmakers, and that was the first time we had seen the young picture of George Washington Albright. But she was meticulous in her care of and storage of these images. So she created, and they're actually 3-ring binders, but she wrote a biography on each of the major characters. And then whatever pictures had come down, she, carefully put them in sleeves. And so her written word and the pictures are all together. She passed in 2017, and I inherited everything. So I have been going through a lot of things and trying to keep it as organized, and they're precious, and like Bianca, I'm working on digitizing as many of them as much as I can. So yeah, that's the way to do it. But it brings up an interesting point of, Bianca, as you and I get older, there's going to come a day where we want these things, as you said, to be safe and protected, and somewhere where they can be shared and enjoyed by everybody. So it gets me thinking about that. Yeah, maybe I'll come join your museum.
Kiwi, I just saw your cat, and so hi, Kitty.
Oh,
I love
has
seeing
been.
I love seeing pets on these virtual things.
Yeah.
We have a question from Tasha. What, if any, part did obituaries play in the discovery of information? I think Emmanuel Handy had an obituary. I can't remember if
Yes.
Albright did.
Yeah, I believe so.
Did y'all learn anything from that you didn't already know?
I did not. And in fact, I don't even remember seeing an obituary. He was in Colorado with Eliza when he passed, and I think it was you, DeeDee, who found the headstone, or yeah, who found the headstone. My youngest niece, Katie, who is now living in Colorado, is going to do a drive-by over there and see if she can locate it, because it would be really wonderful to have physical presence on that headstone. But I have not seen an obituary.
Do you know where Josephine is buried?
Yes, both Josephines.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, Los Angeles has several big cemeteries. One of the oldest in the city is Rosedale, and I'm trying to think of some of the oldest headstones that I've seen there, but they go back into the mid 1800s. So everybody, with the exception of Roy, is buried at Rosedale. So my grandparents, Josephine is very close to Nana and Granddaddy's grave. My mother and father are across the street in another section, and my brother is buried there. So yeah, everybody is at Rosedale.
Bianca, I can't remember if there's a headstone photo for Emmanuel or not. I'm looking at his Find a Grave page. Oh, there is, yeah.
There's an obituary, there's a headstone, and if you dig deep enough, you'll find the children's headstones. That's how I found out about his first son, or another son that had the bar fight, and his I think is in Northern America somewhere. I don't know what state exactly, maybe Wisconsin or somewhere. And then I believe Florence and Emmanuel Handy Jr., I hope I get this right, but I believe they're still on the property. We have some headstones there on Handy Heights. So
So just I think we have about 5 more minutes. I just so one more thing. I think it's really cool in both of these families how you know so much about the women in the families, because a lot of times the women's stories get lost. As I've been researching these legislators, a lot of them I have no idea who their wives were, or you know if they had any cool daughters or anything like that. So y'all are also really fortunate that you know stuff about the women, especially Kiwi, and Bianca. You know that she was a great cake maker, and that's just a cool little tidbit to know about somebody. Um, do y'all have any final thoughts that you want to share in the last couple minutes? Bianca, do you want to go first?
Well, just to touch on your point, a lot of the women were very, they were the ones with the stories. In my research, I found out that not only did Florence, you know, she was the byproduct of the slave master um, rape, basically, of the slave. There was another situation of that. So there's some like sisters and cousins in there woven in there that are not really documented as much. And so when you start looking at like, okay, well, who's the father? And you'll see it was these slave masters. Their stories are quite interesting once you start digging into it and seeing like who the fathers were, who their children were, what they ended up doing. You know, one was like his wife was a cake maker. Manuel Handy's wife was a cake maker. Florence, the reason why they had all that land to begin with was because she was basically bequeathed all that land from her white judge family members. And then moving on to their children and their great grandchildren, we have all these female musicians who were quite successful. And then the girls of the two sisters of the 11 great grandchildren of, sorry, not great grandchildren, grandchildren of Emmanuel Handy actually got to go to college, which was rare back then. So there's a lot of interesting stories woven in there.
Yeah, also for our family, and it's not that we don't know about the men, but you know, obviously it was not hard to find information about Josephine Hardy. In fact, my mom found a book, very thick book that goes into the Hardy name and the legacies. And so, you know, I can rattle off her parents' names and her grandparents' names, whereas with George, I don't even know his mother's name. And it's tragic and it's heartbreaking, but it speaks even more to what both Bianca and I are trying to do in maintaining these stories. And I don't know if you're finding this, Bianca, but I feel they are taking on a life of their own. They're you know, growing legs, and they will be told. You know, it was coincidence that, you know, we ran into you, DeeDee, but, you know, maybe it wasn't coincidence. I have something I call the corporeal space where I feel their presence pushing me on. And I'm so blessed, and I know what a gift this all is, and I'm just honored to share it with everybody today. Thank you.
Knowing the history is a gift, and also both of you are a gift just to be here and share this with us today. So thank you both for doing this. I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie, and thanks to everybody who came today. I hope you enjoyed it. And this will be recorded and available if you want to share it with other people in your family or other people you think might be interested.
Yes, thank you so much to our panelists for being with us today. This has been so interesting. And I'm just thankful that we could find a time to have both of you here and you share your amazing story. Because this is truly rare that we get descendants this far back that can actually, you know, share these types of stories. So thank you so much, and thank you, DeeDee, for organizing it, or you know, organizing this talk with me. All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping. Our next talk is scheduled for June 25th. I'll be sending out registration information for that shortly. You can find it over the SMART listserv. You can find it through our social media accounts. Wherever you saw it posted, I usually post it to SAA, their announcement board as well. And that's going to be a group of archivists and librarians from MUW, and they're going to be talking about their LGBTQ plus oral history collection. Um, we're also going to be launching our next season of Virtual Table Talks pretty soon. I'll be sending out a call for proposals on that. If you're interested in giving a virtual table talk, you don't necessarily even have to be a member of the Society of Mississippi Archivists. We're interested in hosting talkers from all over. So if you have something that you would like to speak on, shoot me an email. Our tentative theme for the next season is going to be Ask an Archivist, where archivists who may have, a specialization in something, maybe your bread and butter is preserving photographs or preserving oral histories, or like DeeDee's, her bread and butter is kind of like oral genealogy. If you have some kind of specialty that you want to talk on, that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on. Or if you would like to just know more about the Society of Mississippi Archivists, our web address is listed on this slide. And like DeeDee just mentioned, all of these recordings for our virtual table talks can be found at our YouTube link. You should be getting a follow-up email right at 1 o'clock that has a link to our YouTube account, so you can find all the videos there. And as soon as the video for this talk is ready, I will upload that. So give me a few days. I am at home on maternity leave with a 2.5-year-old and a 2-month-old, so it does take me a little bit of time to get things going. But I promise to have that up by the beginning of next week at the latest. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.